My life had always been a quiet, earnest pursuit of stability and simple joys. I was the eldest, the quiet achiever, the one who navigated the world with a careful, analytical mind. My younger sister, Olivia, was the sun around which our family orbited. She was dazzling, effervescent, a magnet for attention, her laughter bright, her tears equally dramatic. Our parents, loving and devoted, often seemed swept up in Olivia's whirlwind of emotions, her endless need for validation. If I brought home a scholarship, it was met with a proud nod. If Olivia had a minor social setback, it became a collective family crisis requiring immediate, intense intervention. I loved Olivia, of course. She was my sister, my only sibling, my flesh and blood, but there was always a subtle ache, a quiet resentment, a constant feeling of being perpetually competent, yet perpetually overshadowed. I built my life with meticulous planning. I pursued a demanding but rewarding career as a physical therapist, carefully saved every penny, envisioning a future of financial security and eventually, a comfortable retirement. My dream was modest, a small cottage by the lake, where I could spend my evenings reading, far from the city's hustle. I believed in integrity, in facing reality head-on, in the quiet dignity of earned success. Olivia, on the other hand, drifted between various creative pursuits, none of which ever quite took off. She relied heavily on our parents for financial support, always with a new passion, a new project, and an endless stream of reasons why her efforts hadn't quite materialized. Her life was a series of grand pronouncements, followed by dramatic failures, each one demanding our collective focus and sympathy. Looking back, the cracks in our seemingly harmonious family dynamic were subtle, almost imperceptible to my trusting heart. Olivia had a history, even from childhood, of using emotional manipulation to get what she wanted. A slight cough would become a prolonged wheeze requiring special attention. A minor stumble would necessitate elaborate stories of near-fatal accidents. Our parents, ever solicitous, would drop everything, showering her with care and concern, while I, the skeptical observer, often found myself stifling a sigh, a quiet suspicion fluttering in the back of my mind. I attributed it to her artistic temperament, her innate need for connection and validation. I didn't realize then that these were early rehearsals for a much grander, more devastating deception, one that would exploit our deepest fears. As we grew older, Olivia's charm became a more refined, more insidious tool. She'd weave intricate tales of woe, spinning narratives of professional jealousy, of unfair bosses, or unsupportive friends, always positioning herself as the wronged party, the misunderstood genius. Our parents, heartbroken by her perceived struggles, would rally around her, offering financial support, emotional comfort, and endless patience. Meanwhile, my own quiet successes, my careful planning, my independent nature, seemed to fade further into the background. My stability was a given, a point of comfort for them. Her instability was a constant emergency that required their full, unceasing attention. My parents began to speak more often of Olivia's fragility, of her sensitive soul, of the need to protect her. They'd implore me to be more understanding, more supportive, to be the strong sister who always looked out for her. I tried. I really did. I listened to her endless dramas, offered pragmatic advice she rarely took, and provided practical help whenever I could, often at the expense of my own time and energy. I felt a growing sense of unease, a cold prickle on my skin, whenever she seemed to manipulate situations, but I dismissed it as her desperate way of coping with a world that felt overwhelming to her. I didn't realize then that these were not just cracks, but gaping chasms, hinting at a truth far more profound and sinister than I could comprehend. A consistent peculiarity was Olivia's uncanny ability to draw attention to herself, especially when someone else was experiencing a significant life event. If I had a major presentation at work, she'd suddenly suffer a mysterious illness. If our parents were celebrating a milestone anniversary, she'd conjure a dramatic personal crisis, a breakup, a sudden eviction notice, a looming financial disaster. It was a pattern I subconsciously noted but never confronted, believing it to be mere coincidence, a quirky aspect of her personality, a desperate cry for validation. I didn't realize then that her competitive need for the spotlight knew no bounds, no moral lines it wouldn't cross. The most unsettling crack, though, was the increasing emotional distance from my parents, especially as I grew more independent, more self-sufficient. They seemed to bond over Olivia's perceived vulnerabilities, creating a closed circle of sympathy that subtly excluded me. I was the strong one, the one who didn't need their worry, the one who could handle anything. Their praise for my strength felt less like a compliment and more like an exemption from their deepest affection, their most profound concern, their desperate need to fix something. I often yearned for that same level of intense, all-consuming worry they reserved for Olivia, even while I hated the drama that seemed to bring it about. I didn't realize then that their emotional investment in Olivia's crises had a darker, more manipulative undercurrent, and that I was about to become the unwitting source of their next, greatest dramatic output, a well from which Olivia would draw infinite sympathy and financial gain. The climax arrived not with a bang, not with a sudden, shattering explosion, but with a hushed, terrified whisper that coiled around my heart and squeezed. It was a cold Tuesday evening. I was just finishing a long shift at the clinic, exhausted, when my phone rang. It was Olivia. Her voice was trembling, barely audible through what sounded like forced, dramatic sobs. I got the test results back, she choked out, her voice thin with a manufactured fragility. It's cancer. Stage 3. They said it's aggressive. My breath hitched. My heart stopped. Cancer. The word hung in the air, cold and final, a devastating echo in the quiet clinic hallway, shattering the mundane routine of my carefully ordered life. My little sister. My dramatic, chaotic, attention-seeking sister. This couldn't be another one of her exaggerated ailments. Not cancer. Not this. My nursing instincts, usually so sharp, were momentarily paralyzed by the sheer terror of the word. I rushed to her apartment, my mind reeling, my professional training warring with my personal terror. She was curled up on her couch, pale and impossibly fragile, a doctor's note clutched in her hand, its official letterhead blurred by her dramatic tears. The note, though vague in its medical details, its clinical language almost too generic, seemed to confirm the diagnosis, a rare, aggressive form of ovarian cancer, requiring immediate, extensive, and experimental treatment. My parents were already there, their faces etched with shock and profound grief, rallying around her, their voices hushed with sorrow, their eyes wide with fear. The world went silent, then exploded into a million shattering pieces. It was like a sudden, brutal awakening, a blinding flash of lightning that illuminated the darkest corners of my life. My sister. Cancer. This wasn't a crack, it was a devastating earthquake that shook the very foundations of my existence. Every past annoyance, every frustration with her dramatic tendencies, evaporated in an instant, replaced by a searing pain, a profound, gut-wrenching fear for her life. She was my sister. My only sister. I would do anything. I would give anything. The next few weeks were a blur of frantic, desperate activity. Olivia, ever the master manipulator, claimed her health insurance was inadequate, that the cutting-edge, experimental treatments she desperately needed were astronomically expensive, far beyond our family's means. Our parents, heartbroken and desperate, immediately began draining their retirement savings, borrowing against their home, their eyes wide with fear for their golden child. I, too, without hesitation, emptied my carefully cultivated savings account, the money intended for my first home, my small cottage by the lake, pouring every last dime into her supposed medical fund. Friends and extended family, horrified by the news, rallied, organizing fundraisers, setting up online crowdfunding campaigns, donating generously, touched by Olivia's heartbreaking courage and resilience. Olivia, meanwhile, seemed to blossom under the intense outpouring of sympathy and financial support. She wore headscarves, even before any hair loss, spoke in hushed, fragile tones, and recounted harrowing treatment details, nausea, fatigue, bone-deep aches, that, to my trained nursing ear, sounded oddly vague, almost rehearsed, lacking the specificity of a genuine patient. But I dismissed my fleeting suspicions, attributing them to my own stress, my own overwhelming fear, my desperate need to believe. She was dying. My sister was dying. As time went on, the red flags, once dismissed as minor anomalies, began to accumulate, becoming glaringly obvious to my increasingly wary mind. Olivia never seemed to get visibly sicker. She didn't experience the drastic weight loss, the profound fatigue, the hair thinning that accompanied aggressive chemotherapy. Her skin remained unblemished, her eyes bright. Her hair remained thick and glossy under her carefully chosen scarves. She refused to let me accompany her to appointments, always having a convenient excuse: a new, private, doctor, a need for solitude during difficult infusions, a specialized clinic far away. When I offered to review her medical charts, to help her navigate the complex, bewildering world of cancer treatment, to advocate for her as a nurse, she'd snap, her voice suddenly sharp and defensive: "You're not my doctor. You're my sister. Just support me. You're just trying to control everything, as usual." Her anger felt disproportionate, her secrecy suffocating, her defensiveness a jarring note in her fragile performance. My parents, however, brushed off my concerns, their denial fierce, unwavering, clinging to the hope of her recovery. "She's just stressed, darling," my mother would say, a pleading note in her voice. "She's going through so much. You need to be strong for her." Their blindness, their desperate need to believe, was almost as painful as Olivia's deception. The biggest crack, though, the one that tore open the gaping wound of betrayal, was a casual conversation I overheard. My mother was on the phone, her voice hushed, with a distant cousin who had also donated generously to Olivia's extensive medical fund. "Yes," my mother whispered, her voice laced with relief and pride, "she's doing so much better. The money has really helped her get back on her feet. She's talking about a trip to Europe, a long-deserved vacation, to celebrate her recovery, a fresh start." Europe. Recovery. My stomach dropped like a stone. A cold, hard certainty began to form in my gut, congealing into a horrifying, undeniable truth. Cancer recovery wasn't a sudden, miraculous event followed by a lavish European vacation. It was a grueling, protracted battle, often leaving patients weak, financially drained, and emotionally scarred. My suspicions, once fleeting, hardened into a terrifying, undeniable truth. I started my own investigation, cold, methodical, driven by a fury that burned brighter than any grief. I called the clinic Olivia claimed to visit, the number she'd given me. It was a disconnected line. I contacted the prestigious oncologist whose name was on the fraudulent note she'd provided, a renowned specialist whose office informed me they had no record of Olivia, our last name, ever being a patient. I even cross-referenced the official letterhead on her diagnosis note. It was a cheap, generic template easily found online, a poorly disguised fake. And then, the crushing realization. My savings account. It was empty. The money my parents had supposedly poured into her treatment, the money I had sacrificed, it was all gone. There were no legitimate medical bills matching the extravagant sums, no legitimate paper trail. Only transfers into Olivia's personal bank account, used for lavish expenses, for designer clothes, for high-end dining, for flights, for a life of luxury she could never otherwise afford. The truth, in its full, agonizing glory, hit me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me breathless, reeling, my world shattering around me. Olivia hadn't just exaggerated an illness. She had faked cancer. All of it. The diagnosis, the treatments, the suffering, the imminent death, the brave fight, a grotesque, calculated charade. For attention. For sympathy. And for money. My money. Our parents' money. The money from countless well-meaning friends and strangers, all of whom had poured out their hearts and their wallets for a lie. She had stolen thousands from me, from our parents, all built on a foundation of the cruelest, most heinous lie imaginable, a lie that desecrated the very concept of human suffering. The emotional chaos was instant, overwhelming. Heartbreak for my shattered innocence, for the blind love I had given, for the precious years I had spent consumed by grief and fear for her, for a life that was never in danger. Anger at Olivia, a searing, venomous rage that pulsed through my veins, consuming me, for her calculated deception, her profound cruelty, her monstrous manipulation. Shame, for being so utterly fooled, for blindly trusting her, for sacrificing my future for a phantom illness. And silence. A deafening, echoing silence in my now empty apartment, a silence that magnified the screams in my head, the crashing sound of my world falling apart. My sister. A liar. A thief. What came after was a raw, visceral struggle for survival. I didn't want revenge that would just burn everything down. I wanted truth, justice, and a chance to reclaim my life, my name, my dignity. I needed peace, and peace wouldn't come from silence or passive acceptance of this monstrous lie. I sat in my apartment, clutching the fake diagnosis note, the proof of her monstrous lie, the final piece of evidence in her elaborate charade. My parents were still in a blissful state of denial, celebrating Olivia's miraculous recovery, planning her triumphant recovery trip. I couldn't let it stand. The initial shock gave way to a cold, hard fury, a burning need for light in the crushing darkness. There was no going back. The truth had to come out. I meticulously gathered all the evidence, the fake doctor's note, the disconnected clinic number, the financial statements showing the thousands I had transferred to her, the records of my parents' depleted savings, the screenshots of the elaborate crowdfunding page she had set up, the countless messages of sympathy and support from unwitting donors. I documented every inconsistency in her stories, every vague detail, every evasive answer, cross-referencing it with my nursing knowledge. My professional training, my attention to detail, my ethical compass, became my greatest weapon in this fight. The first, and most agonizing, step was confronting my parents. I invited them and Olivia to my apartment, feigning a recovery celebration. I wanted to see their faces, to witness the moment their carefully constructed fantasy imploded. I sat them down, their faces smiling, oblivious, filled with a proud, almost celebratory air. I placed the stack of evidence on the coffee table between us, a silent accusation. Olivia, I began, my voice dangerously calm, devoid of emotion, a chilling contrast to the tempest raging inside me. I have some questions about your miraculous recovery. Her face went pale, her bright eyes suddenly wide with terror. Her gaze darted to the stack of papers, then to mine, filled with a sudden, stark fear. She tried to stammer, to deny, to deflect, but I cut her off, my voice unwavering, resolute. I called your clinic. Disconnected. Your doctor has no record of you. This note? I held up the fake diagnosis, its fraudulent nature starkly clear in the light. It's a template. You never had cancer, did you, Olivia? You faked it. All of it. The pain, the suffering, the near-death experience, the battle. It was all a lie. And you took thousands from me. From Mom and Dad. From our friends, our family, strangers. All for attention. All for money. You played on our deepest fears, our love, our compassion. How could you? The truth detonated in the room, a deafening explosion of shattered illusions. Olivia's carefully constructed facade shattered. She dissolved into hysterics, screaming, crying, trying to blame me for ruining her life, for betraying her, for being jealous of her attention. My parents, their faces a mixture of disbelief and profound heartbreak, looked from her to me, then back to the damning evidence. Their disbelief slowly morphed into a horrifying realization, a dawning horror that replaced their proud smiles with masks of anguish. Their golden child. A fraud. A monster. My mother, Maria, gasped, covering her mouth, her eyes welling up with tears of shame and a grief that transcended the simple loss of money, the grief for the daughter she thought she knew. My father, Robert, usually so composed, looked utterly devastated, his shoulders slumping under the immense weight of the lie, the years of his own blind devotion. They had believed her, poured their life savings into her charade, blinded by their desperate need to see her, well, to shield her, to love her. The aftermath was a seismic shock that ripped our family apart, leaving gaping wounds that might never fully heal. My parents were consumed by a grief that transcended the financial loss, the profound grief of realizing their beloved daughter was a manipulative fraud, a remorseless liar. The news, once contained within our family, inevitably spread like wildfire through our extended family and social circles. The shame, the humiliation, the sheer audacity of Olivia's deception, became a public scandal, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones. Our family, once seen as pillars of generosity and compassion, became the subject of pity and judgment, their names tarnished by her monstrous lies. My revenge wasn't about vindictiveness, it was about justice and reclamation. It was about ensuring Olivia faced the consequences of her profound cruelty, and that my parents, and all the innocent donors, found some measure of truth and healing. I didn't go to the police immediately. I gave Olivia one final chance, a desperate plea: confess, return the money, and seek help, true help, not just attention. She refused, defiantly, still trying to manipulate, still claiming victimhood, still believing her own lies. So, I took action. I reported her to the authorities for criminal fraud. I contacted the crowdfunding platform she used, providing them with all the meticulous evidence, ensuring they would shut down her fraudulent campaigns and pursue legal action of their own. The legal process was agonizing, drawn out, and emotionally draining, but it was necessary. Olivia was charged with multiple counts of fraud. She was forced to face the consequences of her actions, stripped of the sympathy she craved, and publicly exposed for the manipulative liar she truly was. She faced legal repercussions, social ostracism, and a criminal record that would follow her. The hundreds of thousands of dollars she had stolen, including my hard-earned savings, were partially recovered through legal channels, but the financial loss felt insignificant compared to the profound emotional reclamation. I cut ties with Olivia forever. There was no going back, no forgiveness for a betrayal so profound, so utterly dehumanizing, so fundamentally evil. The sister I had loved no longer existed, she was merely a ghost, a stranger, a cruel lesson etched into my soul. The emotional bond was severed, replaced by a cold, impenetrable void. My relationship with my parents was the hardest to mend. They were devastated, not just by Olivia's actions, but by their own blind spots, their naive trust, their years of enabling her behavior. They apologized profusely, tears streaming down their faces, begging for forgiveness for ever doubting me, for ever falling for Olivia's lies, for their own complicity in the decades of enabling. It was a long, painful road, filled with difficult conversations and raw honesty, but with time, therapy, and persistent effort, we slowly began to rebuild our connection, not on the old illusions, but on a fragile, newfound honesty and understanding. They learned to see Olivia for who she truly was, a deeply manipulative, desperate individual, and they learned to see me, truly see me, for the first time, as the daughter who had been wronged, but who had fought for her truth, for her integrity. I didn't want revenge. I needed peace. And that peace began to bloom when I accepted that my story wasn't about her failure, or their blindness, but about my resilience. It was about standing up for the truth, about fighting for what was right, about proving that I could emerge from the wreckage stronger, wiser, and infinitely more whole. I learned that sometimes, the greatest betrayals lead to the most profound discoveries about yourself, about self-worth, and about the true meaning of family.